Okay, I am here to do another pan redo. When I get called in to do these, it's usually when the problems really start beginning. Moving this blanket back a little bit. So the problems with this particular one happened because water was pooling outside of the pan, the curb area, and it actually started running. I guess the way this foundation worked, it started running into the closet and getting the carpet wet. So when that happens, it usually has to do with everything having to do with the curb. The curb wasn't built right, it wasn't wrapped right, it wasn't waterproofed, the pan liner wasn't cut right, or it was cut bad. A lot of other issues happen, but it's always going to be the curb and or the sealing of the shower door, which is usually secondary, but this is kind of as bad as it gets as far as curbs and the way not to do a curb. So they came in with this pan liner and went up way above in this area. You can't see the pan liner, actually goes further into the next tile, but they didn't quite have enough. So once they got to the curb, they went, oh damn, we don't have enough to wrap the curb with. So they actually scabbed some pieces in. Actually, they scabbed in a lot of different pieces, which is a little confusing to me. But they scabbed this piece in so that they could wrap all the way down to the bottom of the curb. And it looks like they, which I didn't see until now, looks like they scabbed in this piece here. They did a lot of scabbing. They did some in the corner here. They made a lot of cuts and put corner pieces in, which were actually never glued to begin with. So, you know, sometimes I do a little, what I would call an autopsy of a failure on a shower, or in this case a curb. Look at that, oh my god. And so it amazes me how many mistakes can be made, which is 99% of the reason I do these videos is to kind of show other people how it should not go. So this apparently was done 10 years ago, and 10 years later their curb is failed, and so now they have to do a whole new shower pan, meaning I got to take out all this concrete and tile, and if I can, the drain. One of the issues on this is the slab, and I may or may not be able to get to the drain because they should have put concrete up around the neck of it. So we will see. The bench was actually built within the shower pan, which is a no-no, and I would like to take the bench out, but that would almost dictate that I have to do all these other tile going another row up, or at least these 4. So I prefer not to take the bench out. Once I get all this material out, I'll see if the bench needs to come out or not. But chances are I will, only because they used sheetrock as their backer board, so, which I'm really kind of shocked at. I've seen green board being used before. There's other products that are gypsum based, but they're waterproof, but this is sheetrock. And so not only did they use sheetrock, but they used mastic. This is not thin set. And so the mastic is a little incidental. This actually might even be the premixed thin set, which I would never use. Premixed thin set acts a lot like mastic in that it's kind of rubbery and it bends and stuff like that, and it may or may not be that, but if they had used real thin set, the thin set would be like concrete. It would be hard, and there's no way you'd be able to bend on it. So that's another mistake. But the biggest mistake is that they use sheetrock straight on here, and then of course they did something that I tell people about over and over and over in videos, especially with other tilers. I don't know why you feel the need to put your wallboard up once you've done your shower pan liner. Why do you put your wallboard up first? I can't wrap my head around the illogic of some of you guys that are out there, and I don't like critiquing other people. But please don't put your wallboard up first. Pour your pan up to the liner. Once that dries, then put your wallboard on. Why would you ever put wallboard inside of here? So no matter what wallboard it is, it's all porous and it's all going to weep up water, especially with this, which is a lot of the problem. You know, this just use sheetrock. So that's just you know, again, I can't wrap my head around the logic of that's okay. You know, when you put wallboard up and you have a suspicion that water is going to be able to go up the wallboard and saturate and rot all this. Look at that. Look at that. That's just mud. You know, wallboard is gypsum, and when it gets wet, it's mud. So this is just all muddy, squishy stuff that the customer ended up having to tear out. And there's just no excuse for it to have that. Look at that huge gap. That's just crazy. I mean, that's just so nutty. Let me get back to the curb. This curb is really bad in a lot of ways, and it's hard to. This one really surprised me. It's hard to imagine any tiler, and apparently this is a company that does tile work, that any tiler would scab together so many pieces of pan liner to make one piece, and then even doing it wrong. For example, ooh, look at that. That's just bad. Okay, so I don't know where this is one piece and the second piece got glued in. At least they overlap that okay. I guess it starts over here, so they overlap this okay, but look what they did here. You know, the corners are your Achilles heel of curbs. Corners, and then of course your nail heads and all this stuff. And so the corner, not, you know, it got scabbed in, but it didn't even get glued. Like there's no overlap. At the bottom here, there is a good size overlap, maybe 5 or 6 inches of overlap to the top piece. But in the corner, there's no overlap whatsoever. In fact, the top piece was part of this piece, and they just cut along here, which there was not a reason to do that. What they should have done is just folded this piece in and then make the cut and then have this flap go over so that it runs kind of all as one piece. But look at, see what happens? So they push the wallboard up there to push it on there, and all of a sudden you have a gap. And so if you don't do the tile and the ceiling correctly, then water is going to obviously get through that gap, which is the reason, one of the reasons why this curb is saturated. This is pressure treated wood, but every single one of these pieces have been saturated over the last 10 years to the point where they're just giving off this black stuff, like it's been on fire or something. This is interesting too. So they did what they were not supposed to do on this corner as well, and then they went, oh crap, we weren't supposed to do that. So then they tried to glue in the secondary piece, but it never really got glued in. I shouldn't be able to do this, but I can actually pull this off. This part wasn't glued at all. In order to save face on, oops, I shouldn't have cut that, they glued this piece in, but there was no purpose for it because they didn't glue it on top of the crack that they cut. So they got this gap here, and they got the gap over here. They had the nails, and then guess what? I don't know where the pieces are now. I guess he took them out. They wrapped the curb with the same sheetrock that they used on the walls. So they wrapped the curb with sheetrock. And of course, you can see clearly they never did any type of topical membrane. There's no waterproofing, there's no red guard, there's nothing on these walls. So had they done a couple of things, okay, so they used sheetrock, okay. But had they not set the board first, had they just poured the pan, put the sheetrock on, and then used red guard over the whole thing, including the curb, then it would almost negate this. It would negate that, and it would negate all these nail heads, because the red guard will make it impermeable to water. Water won't saturate into any of that sheetrock that they used. But the fact that they didn't use it, they didn't use a topical membrane, nor did they use any type of care to make sure that these heads were, these nail heads or screw heads or whatever they were, they didn't take any care to make sure that those weren't going to get penetrated. I mean, I don't mind that they penetrated the pan liner. It's almost impossible not to do when you're putting your wallboard on top of it, but then the curb should be buttered, and then once that's buttered with your thin set, then it should be at least 2 or 3 coats of red guard on it. Then the holes wouldn't matter, the cracks wouldn't matter, etc., etc. So anyway, I talk a lot, sorry. This is just, you know, they knew enough to get by, but they didn't know enough to have something that lasts. This shouldn't be 10 years later, this should be not at all. But even if it got to this point, you know, maybe by the time somebody's ready to renovate again in 25, 30, 40 years, I don't know, sometimes I'm speechless, and this one really has me that way. But anyway, again, the process of taking this out I've already showed on other videos where I'm doing a complete redo of a pan. I'll probably put a link somewhere here on how to do a retrofit of a pan where we're not taking out the whole shower, we're just fixing something like this. I'm not going to come back on this video unless I run into some big issues, because with that link you'll be able to see how I go about doing this. But all this material has to come out. All this is going to be cut out down to the point where there's nothing here, and I'll start all over again, and I'm going to get started on it. Alright, I said I would not start videoing again unless I found something that was different, and I have found a couple of things. One is this shower pan was actually poured with concrete. Concrete is not what you want to use. This is 10 minutes of banging just to get this little hole dug out of there with a solid concrete pan. And concrete is not what you ever want to use for a shower pan. You want to use mortar mix, brick mortar if you will, sand mix, sand topping mix. This is concrete, and so this is a big no-no. So normally a pan comes out in pretty good chunks and sections, and I usually have it out in about 10 minutes, but 10 minutes of just getting a little grip and not getting sizable chunks. I'm just kind of stopping with that and get a jackhammer or figure out some other way. Anyway, another way I thought about is getting it under with a pry bar, crowbar or something like that, and just pulling the whole thing out, since it's kind of all together with the pan anyway. So as I was getting the curb pieces out, the top two came out relatively easy. They weren't very long nails that held them in. But the bottom piece, hello. I mean, I literally took a screwdriver on one end, shoved it up under there, because I didn't see any nail heads or anything. So they had concrete nails and used what's called a bang gun. The bang gun has a little 22 blank round in it, which gives the power when you knock that bang gun with a hammer, and the nails on the end of it, it pushes down into the concrete. So I usually use about 6 to 8 of those nails for my first piece, and then I just nail down the other curb pieces in succession. But this was, for all intents and purposes, a floating curb, because the only nails in here were the successive pieces that were on top. Otherwise, it was never anchored. And of course, it's rotted, and that's from all the water. Speaking of water, when I started tearing out this little scrap piece over here, I was very tempted to go get my Sawzall, put a small blade on it, and get a good clean cut, but I backed off of that. One of the reasons, this is a slab type construction, and when they do slab, they always bring pipes up through the slab when they build. And sure enough, if you look back here, there's a 3/4 inch pipe, which is your main line coming into the house, and it feeds the shower. And this 3/4 pipe is literally right where I would have had my Sawzall blade. So you have to think ahead a little bit and not go, as they say, balls to the wall trying to tear things out with all your tools and all that stuff. You have to be adherent to the fact that there's stuff you can't see, and that would have been a big mess had I cut in for that. So I use a razor knife or any other type of tool I can, but not anything electrical that will get in there and accidentally cut pipes and stuff. So just a heads up. Okay, there is one last thing I just have to show. I have to show this. This house was built 10 years ago. When they built this house, there was a plumber involved. So the plumber came in. This was never ever a tub where they had to move the drain, and ran out of room to put a P-trap, and decided, well, it is what it is. This is the way that it was plumbed in 10 years ago. And plumbers think they're all that and we don't make mistakes and blah blah blah, but then I see this shoddy work they do on a lot of different jobs that I've been at, and it boggles my mind. Like, why would you ever do that? So there is a tool, I don't have it with me right now. It kind of looks like a spur, the spur the cowboys use to hit the horse. It's about the same size too, and it has an extension on it, probably 2 inches or longer, and it's a 3/8 drill bit. You just put it on your drill and you're good to go. That tool actually cuts out on the inside, so for argument's sake, let's say his pipe looks like he used a 2-inch pipe in here. So he came up with the pipe at some point when the house was being built and said, oh crap, you know, we're too high up. And then he decided to go ahead and glue this bottom flange on anyway. That he glued the flange on anyway, knowing full well that this is going on. Knowing that, rather than just grabbing that tool and going, okay, well, let me just cut off 1.5 inches of this and then set the flange, right? So not only is there not a pre-slope, which again I have my opinion on and I don't believe in them necessarily, but look at that. I mean, that's just crazy. So when I took the pan liner actually wrapped around this. When I took the pan liner off, the pan liner was actually wrapped around all the way down. So you're 1 inch to about 1.25 inches on this side higher. So if any water had ever gotten into the grout and into the pan, it would have pooled and pooled and pooled and pooled and just stayed stagnant there and stagnant there. And the weep holes, which would be, yep, what'd I do with it? I don't know where it's at now. Oh, there it is. So the top flange goes like that, and that's where your weep holes and your little troughs are, so the excess water goes into the drain. Now you tell me how the excess water is ever going to get up and around to make those even usable, pre-slope or not. That's just nutty. So that's what I'm dealing with, and that's the finished product of everything taken out. This concrete was very, very heavy because of the extra buildup they had to do with that, and then get their rise on it. This is probably a good 200 pounds, if not 250 pounds worth of concrete that was in here. It was crazy, but it's all gone now, and bench is gone, and I had to take a couple more tile out where the bench were at, so that will be all fixed and everything too. So that's it. I'm done. I'm not critiquing this anymore. There's no scabbing, there's no 2x6s in between the studs, but then again, that's just something that I do. But that's all I can really critique on this. I've critiqued enough already. Okay, 5 days later, this shower pan has been redone. And it's a little different. It's a little bit more palatable than that very busy tile that was there before. And they managed to save, which is really, really great. They managed to save the same type of tile that this shower was built with 10 years ago. So that whole bottom row got changed out with the same light tile, so there was no matching issue, which is kind of rare, but it worked out well. The bench was concrete. It was a concrete bench that was filled in, and I think I showed that before, as well as a concrete floor. So this took a little bit more time because I had to pour some concrete back up to the drain level prior to this being done, so that I had something to work with. This, if you remember, the drain was up way too high. So anyway, that got redone, and we did some 2x2 tumbled marble on a mat that we did on the floor. And as I said, the same type of tile they saved, so I was able to do both the inside and the outside of the curb with the same type of tile. I was able to do the bench with the same type of tile. This is a travertine. This is a 18-inch travertine that, you know, I cut. I don't like lines on the benches. So the way I did this bench is a Curdy bench, which is about $90 or so, but it's basically foam, so it's waterproof anyway. So that got set in there, and then I put the one piece on top of there with a little slope on it, and they managed to save from back in the day. They also had some bullnose, which goes along here, and I was able to put bullnose there to give it a little taper, and that's that. Contiguous curb top that I like so much. It's a 6-inch, it's a 5.5-inch curb, so there's a 1/2 inch overhang on the inside, but that makes sure that there are no grout lines whatsoever, so there will never be an issue, plus it's sloped in. The curb goes on first before the wall tile goes on, so your grout line is vertical rather than horizontal, and that's about it. And it didn't turn out too awful bad. I don't like necessarily some of the issues that they, well, I didn't really go over this before, but on this border there's a lot of lippage and stuff, and I guess this border was thicker than the tile, but they didn't know quite how to do it right. They used 1/4 inch grout lines on this tile I'm assuming because they knew the tile was a ceramic that may not match up, so they used larger grout lines. So if you look around, I had to replicate the same type of grout lines, and that's unfortunate. But it is what it is. Everything kind of matches up, and I'm done. I'm out of here and on to the next job.